have Troy Clarkson, the city's Chief Financial Officer, and Aldo Petronio, the school department's Chief Budget Officer. Goal today is just talk about the budget, the makings of a budget, and then, answer any questions, any concerns that people might have in the audience. Once again, I think everybody here is on it or, on some kind of notification list, but if you're not on the email list, put your email and name down and you'll be notified of these meetings. There's additional packets in the back as well as water and cookies. Constituent services, that's what I'm saying. There's not much, for me that I need to say in form of an introduction, but I am just going to hand it over to Aldo and Troy and get the ball rolling. All right?
Thank you, Councillor, and good evening. My name is Troy Clarkson, and I was appointed the city's second Chief Financial Officer back in February. As you may know, the city only had one CFO prior to me since the position was created by the legislature back in 1990. And to just give you a little brief history, so back in 1990, when the city was struggling financially, the legislature created the position of the CFO to provide some oversight of the city's finances. And so that law remains in effect today and really outlines the responsibilities that I hold in overseeing the finances for the city of Brockton. Because I'm new, just to give you a very brief background, I've worked in local government in both elected and appointed positions for most of my career. Over the last decade or so, I have served in a few different communities in executive capacities. Most recently, I was the town manager in Hanover and Bridgewater before that. I'm actually a native of Brockton. My parents both grew up here. My mom grew up on Plain Street. Her maiden name is Baron Sully, for some of you that may recognize that name. And my dad grew up on Ash Street. We lived here as a family. I have 3 siblings. And when I was young, we moved to Falmouth, where I live today. My dad was a banker and took a job down there. But I've maintained strong connections here and still have roots here in the city, so it was a real honor for me to be able to come back here and serve the community as the CFO. I did leave a bunch of business cards, so I certainly encourage feedback and am happy to engage with groups large or small to share with you the information from our office. Obviously, all of our information is public information. The budget is the most important policy statement of any municipality, so it really sends a message about what's important in the community. And so for this upcoming budget, I think that the mayor and the budget that he submitted and the city council and the budget that they passed just this week really stated some firm priorities and believing in public education, public safety, and public works is really the backbone of our service delivery. I'm happy to chat in detail about any of those departments or budgets. What I did is prepared for you a PowerPoint, and it's fairly lengthy, so I'll only go through every slide if you'd like. But I thought I'd just give you a little bit of a background of the building blocks of how a municipal budget is built, because the revenue sources are varied and significant. Here in the city, so most of your small towns, the majority of money that's spent on the budget comes from property taxes. In a large city like Brockton, that's not the case. And the majority, as you'll see in the graphs that we've prepared, the majority of our revenue actually comes from state aid. And so when my friend and colleague Aldo speaks in a couple of minutes, I think he'll echo that we rely heavily on that state aid to be able to provide most particularly a high level of service in our school department, but in general in the rest of the city as well. So that's an ongoing and annual challenge for us to convince the legislature to properly fund the city. But there are several other revenue sources. So your property taxes, as you can see, contribute roughly $150 million of revenue to the city. And then there are other sources. There's the fees that you pay, building permits that we receive, fines that people pay. So there's the excise taxes on your cars. All of those things contribute also to the city's revenue. And then there's also this thing that you hear a lot about called free cash. And I can tell you that it's neither free nor cash, but that is what it's called. And so if you picture the free cash as a snapshot in time, so each municipality on June 30th, which is when our year ends, so in government, our year goes from July 1st to June 30th on a fiscal year rather than a calendar year. And on June 30th, every city and town in Massachusetts has a snapshot taken of its finances. And so the state looks at revenues that you've received above what you've estimated, money that you have not spent, so money that was budgeted but not spent, and that forms essentially the baseline of what we call free cash. So Brockton has had a history of developing some pretty healthy and robust free cash balances over the years, which is important because right now the practice in the city is to use all of that to help balance the budget in the subsequent year. So for this year that we're about to start in a few weeks, for fiscal year 2020, we'll balance that budget with about $14 million in free cash. And so that's an important factor. The challenge with the free cash is that it varies from year to year, so it makes predictability in the budget somewhat difficult. We do have, if you look on the third slide, looks almost like a spreadsheet. That just gives you a sense of all of the money that we get from the state. So out of that roughly $400 million in the budget, more than half, $210 million, come from the state aid, and you can see on that chart the varied sources of that state aid. Overwhelming majority of it, what we call Chapter 70 aid, is direct aid to the city to support our public schools. And so I just also included a few graphs in there so that you can see not only the revenues but where the money goes. And again, I'd be happy to discuss any of that in detail with you. You hear a lot about Proposition 2.5, and so Proposition 2.5 has been in place since I was in junior high school, so that's quite a long time. And what Proposition 2.5 says is that property taxes can't be raised by more than 2.5 in a single year. So we included in that in this presentation to just show you how we calculate that 2.5% every year. There's also something called new growth, and so that's the tax money that we receive from new construction in the city. That's always estimated very conservatively because you don't want to overestimate that, because then you have to make that money up somewhere else. So you'll see in really all of our revenue projections in the city very conservative estimates, so that we don't put the city in a bad place financially. Jay Condon, who was my predecessor, believed in that, and that's how I was raised in local government, to also believe in very conservative revenue estimation. And what that does is helps create, again, that development of free cash to help us balance the budget every year. I did include on the slide that says City of Brockton's FY20 revenue sources, what we call those local receipts, just to give you an idea of some of the other sources of income. So other than property taxes, you can see that's quite a few different sources of income, and some of them are pretty significant. I would note that one area in where there's been a significant improvement, and our Treasurer Collector Marty Brophy has really been very aggressive in terms of the city's investment income. So although our estimate for that for next year is $400,000, we do expect that to be exceeded significantly. Now, the law is very clear and very strict on how you can invest public funds. So we can't take your tax dollars and, go down to Foxwoods and see if we can hit it big, right? So the law is very restrictive on how you can invest public funds. And despite that, Marty has done an excellent job in really being aggressive within the confines of the law and really getting an excellent rate of return for our investments. And so that's one area where I wanted to highlight, because it's one where we can have some flexibility. In this last budget cycle, you did hear me talk a little bit about ambulance receipts, so I'd like to address that and just talk to you about what that is. So, as you probably know, here in the city of Brockton, the ambulance services are provided by a private company through a contract with the city, and through that contract, the city actually gets some revenue. So that company, Brewster Ambulance, pays the city, and those monies don't go into what's called the general fund. They don't go into general receipts. They go into a separate fund called the Ambulance Receipts Reserve Fund. And because the contract has been particularly beneficial for the city, we're able to use some money in that fund to make some capital purchases. So you'll see sometime this summer a request for the city council to actually purchase a couple of fire trucks. And the plan is to be able to pay the principal and interest for the borrowing for those fire trucks out of the ambulance receipts. Why that's important is that means that there's no direct cost to you, the taxpayers, to buy those fire trucks. So we're constantly looking for ways to be creative to minimize the impact of our operations on the taxpayers. Just to go over a couple of terms with you, the new growth I mentioned, that's the tax revenue we get from new construction in the city. You see a lot of activity in the downtown. We anticipate in future years that will create some pretty significant new growth for the city, which means additional tax revenue. The free cash we've already talked about, and the overlay reserve is kind of an obscure fund, but we set money in the budget aside every year. So if you file for an abatement on your property taxes, we need to have money set aside so that if that abatement is approved, we have a funding source and it doesn't take away from the rest of the budget. So every year we set aside a little money in this overlay account so that we can fund any tax abatements. I did include a graph that shows the free cash development over the last few years. That's the slide that says free cash trends. And then a slide that just generally shows you how that free cash is calculated. It's a little more detailed than that, but that pretty much in a nutshell is how that calculation came up for this year. So the real estate tax receivable for a large city, the city of Brockton does an extremely good job of collecting. And right now we're at about 97% of taxes collected for this fiscal year. So that's a good figure, but there's always a figure of some receivables that are out there. You know, like in any retail store, you have receivables that you still need to collect. And so the receivables that are still hanging out there hit against that free cash. Just going back to Proposition 2.5, and I know I had a slide in here somewhere on that, but there are three ways that Proposition 2.5 can be, that you can exclude your spending from Proposition 2.5. And the reason I mention that is because it's a common way for municipalities, and let me be very clear, there's no proposal on the table to raise your taxes. But just because I'm here and I have the opportunity, I thought I'd share it with you, because you're going to hear lots over the next couple of years about renovating the high school and about building a new police station and a new fire station. And so in the aggregate, that spending is in the hundreds of millions of dollars, and we don't have that kind of cash lying around. So we'll borrow money for those projects. And what our hope is, the city has existing debt. And by the way, the city's debt ratio, so the amount that the bond rating agencies like to see you have for debt is less than 10% or less of your operating budget. So for us, that would be debt payments annually of somewhere in the neighborhood of $35 to $40 million a year. The city's debt payments are around $14 to $15 million a year. So our debt ratio is very strong and very low. But the more you borrow, the more that eats up the rest of the operating budget and takes away from other things you can spend the money on. So we're looking for ways to be able to fund some of these capital projects over the next several years and minimize the impact on your taxes. Here's some really good news. There is a significant amount of debt that's retiring in a few years, several years from now. But we're looking at ways to try to be able to fit into that, what I call a window of opportunity, some of the debt that's upcoming, which would mean that it would, if we could take some of the debt that exists when it expires, slide in some of that new debt there, that really minimizes the impact on you, the taxpayers. And so that's something that we'll be working on over the next few years. And so it's important to start talking about it now. There's no proposals on the table, but I think having these conversations from time to time so that together we can explore what the opportunities are to fund some of these projects is really important. And so if we have the opportunity to fund some of those capital projects without an impact on taxes, it still may require support of the voters. And so it'll be good to have those conversations over the coming years. And I'm happy to, again, I left my business cards, happy to chat in detail with any of you or meet with you so we can talk about specifically the budget and what it means, or how we fund our capital programs, or I can tell you stories about my grandfather growing strawberries on Plain Street. For those of you of a certain age, you may remember, my grandfather, Guido Baroncelli was his name, was the last house in Brockton on Plain Street. And for years, he grew strawberries out in his backyard and sold them out in front of his house. So I don't know if there's anyone in this room that ever had the opportunity to eat one of those delicious strawberries, but I spent a lot of time there as a kid and have some wonderful memories. So with that, I'll pass the microphone over to Aldo, who will talk about the schools.
Good evening. Nice to see you all again. A lot of familiar faces from last year. If you've been following the school budget over the past several years, as you've known, we've been underfunded by the state. They've been changing their formula in a way that it hurts Brockton and helps a lot of the suburbs. So this year is the first year that we didn't have any layoffs in 6 years. But it's not the fact is we're still short money. I'm still short just under $5 million this year. So what we've done is the House and the Senate have proposed their budgets, and it looks like there's an additional anywhere from $2 to $3 million. They're both proposing. They're arguing over how to fund it. So the Compromise Committee, which is the House and Senate, to get together, when they finally decide that budget, hopefully in the coming weeks, we'll see that additional money flow in. But what we've done in the meantime is to not have any layoffs, to not send any more pink slips. Is we basically cut back on our substitute teacher budget almost, it's $1 million, about $1.2 million, almost down to nothing. And knowing that we've got some money coming. We've also cut back on our technology, our computers, books and materials for kids, anywhere but personnel, so that we wouldn't have to go through, because when you start laying off positions, you have to start moving teachers. Start moving teachers, moving classrooms. You're now changing who teaches fourth grade and what goes on. It becomes a huge spider web to put together. And then late in the fall or early in the fall, money's come in again, and then you try and put everything back together again. So we wanted this year, since we went from $16 million deficit almost 4 years ago down to about a $5 million deficit, we thought that we could handle it without doing any layoffs. So we can spend our summer basically working on getting those funds in and applying for additional grants and getting monies in. So that being said, the word out there is there's no layoffs, but we are still short funds. We have been pushing for a lawsuit. We have been advocating, the superintendent and I, at the State House on many occasions. We've been out to Worcester, we've been out to Lowell, we've been all over the state advocating for funds. We had a press conference probably about 6 weeks ago where we announced that we are prepared to file suit. That the suit would be basically saying that the same ed reform that happened in 1993, that they have now, the state has now walked away from their obligation to basically to the poorer children in the state. So the suit is basically saying you must comply with your own formula and your own funding schedule, and you must basically keep up with the inflation that was promised in there and put those funds back into Brockton. Now, there's an independent group out of Boston that does financial analysis for everything from healthcare to taxes to education. It's called Mass Budget Policy Center. Like I said, they're an independent group. They belong to no one. Their report about 6 months ago came out and said that they listed every district in the state. Brockton is owed $48 million more a year in education funding. Looking at the formula that they have that covers you for health insurance and pension and teachers' costs and, bilingual costs and lower income student costs, that's how much is owed to Brockton. So we had many meetings. We actually have 3 very powerful law firms in the state that have offered to do this for us for free. So they're going to do pro bono. We met in Boston. We met with the Attorney General and explained our case, and she heard our case. And then we did a press conference that basically said, we're pretty much ready to go. Now, the state and the legislature, you have in front of you 3 different plans that have been submitted by the House, the Senate, and something called the Boston Promise Plan. All of those plans work for us. Every one of them is good for us. Some are better than others, but they all work. And we basically said is, we know you're trying to, balance the budget for this year right now, but we'll give you a little more time to basically get on one of those plans and do something. If not, we're ready to go. And as we said, here are our attorneys. And honestly, they're all on a first-name basis. They all know each other because they're the best of the best. And they've all said they're doing it for free, and we're ready to file suit. So with that, we're waiting to hear. And honestly, my opinion, I don't think we're going to wait past September 1st. I think that if they don't do something, then we're going to go and file. And it could be a 1 year, it could be a 5-year lawsuit. But either way, it has to start. The city, the mayor has put forward $100,000 last year, because even though the suit is for free, there are still some costs that are associated with paper and copying and filing fees and whatnot. We have a consultant who actually was involved in 1993 with actually getting this through back then. So we're paying him to help us with this project. The city again put up another $100,000 each year, and so is right now it's Brockton and Worcester, New Bedford, but we have about a dozen more communities that are all signing on. So each community is going to contribute funds to this. So that also, in turn, as the legislature hears that there's more money rolling into this, along with these, again, 3 very powerful law firms. The lead plaintiff was actually an attorney for President Obama and for Deval Patrick. So he's very well versed in constitutional law, and he's basically our lead guy. So we're ready to go. We're hoping we don't have to. We're hoping they make a move and choose a plan. And, I feel that the overall formula statewide is underfunded by a couple of $2 billion. But if they put together a plan to phase it in over 5 years, the governor has said he has over $1 billion surplus. So that money should be going to cities and towns like Brockton, who have been basically using up their taxpayer dollars to get what's required for these kids in our schools. Other than that, we're doing very well as far as all of our schools go. We're making progress at doing the repairs that are necessary and needed to keep them up. We've applied for state funding to put a new roof on the Huntington School, which is 123 years old, I think, this year. Probably one of our most solid schools, but the roof is finally having issues. We've applied for that. We've been phasing out classrooms in the North Junior High School. So we phased out 6th grade, we phased out 7th. Next year, the last year, we'll have 8th grade there. As we phase out that school, we've also applied to remodel that entire school. Basically, leave the overall structure, but completely gut the insides and redo the entire exterior, the fields. Basically, kind of make it what they call a STEM school, which is a science and math school. So we put labs in there, redo the entire school. But we're pretty confident the state will approve that project. If they do, in the last few projects, we've had 80-20 spending, where we put up 20% and they paid 80%. So the cost to us is really minimal for the overall project. But once that school is done, we're going to be looking at all the other schools in Brockton High School, because every town around us has been building new schools. I mean, our new schools are 15 years old. We still refer to them as the new schools, but they're 15 years old already. So we have many schools that need modernization and repairs, and, we need computers for every child in every classroom. We need the wiring that goes with it, the infrastructure. Over the years, we've done very well with what they call E-rate funding. It's educational funding. We received all the money we needed to put all of the hard wiring from every school building to every school building. So basically our internet is working great, and a lot of that was federally funded. So it didn't really cost us much money at all to do that. But we have to maintain that. And we have to bring those wires into the schools, literally into every classroom. It used to be that you had one computer and one printer in the classroom, so you had one wire that came down the wall, and that took care of it. Now you need 18, 22, 24 wires. Well, going through these ceilings and going through these schools is a lot of work. So if we can get the remodeling going on the first school, we'll work our way through. And again, if you won't do it in 2 years, it'll be a 10, 15-year project. But you can't sit idle and just wait for something to happen. So with that, I'll take any questions.
I just want to, acknowledge Councillor Beauregard from Ward 5 and Councillor Yaneri from Ward 3. And if it works for everybody, I think what I'll do is I'll, run the microphone out to anyone who has a question, and then run it back to the table. Great way to stay in shape. Great way to make sure everyone hears everyone's questions. Everybody wins. Does anyone have any questions?
I don't need a mic necessarily.
Well, they want it for
For the camera. So I know you, Aldo. I'm not familiar with yourself, but thank you for coming. I have a question on the GIC versus the health plan that was proposed years ago. Are we currently still on the GIC plan, and when is that up for negotiation? And is there any interest in going to that GIC plan? Because I remember back when it was something that could save the city millions of dollars if we instituted that plan.
I'll take a stab at this, and then Aldo can certainly add to it. But in my previous roles in communities, had significant experience with health plan management. And when the legislature changed the law allowing cities and towns to go into the GIC, Brockton actually did similar to what I did in the town where I worked. So the city did not join the GIC, but instead negotiated an agreement with all of the unions to work together to minimize the cost. So Brockton is self-insured on its own, and so you'll see when you look at the city budget, which is online, it's the entirety of the city budget is available for review, and you'll see under the Human Resource Office a line. And for fiscal year 2020, off the top of my head, I believe it's in the 50s. It's $53 or $57 million. That's the city's share of cost to fund the health insurance program for the city. So we're actually self-funded, and so that we contract with a consultant who helps manage the claims and pay those claims. But the money that goes to pay the claims actually comes out of a health insurance trust fund that's operated by the city under the Human Resource Department with supervision from my office. So we're currently still within that negotiated settlement. So until that expires, going to the GIC is not an option. I'll offer you a professional opinion on that. The trust fund here in Brockton has traditionally been managed very, very well. For instance, health insurance rates for next year are only going up by 2%, which is lower than the average you see around the state, and I believe with the GIC. The challenge with the GIC is that the rates can be very volatile, and they can go up really high some years and not so much in other years. There's a lot more unpredictability there, and so some communities, including Brockton, have opted to try to more effectively manage the finances of their programs internally, which they've done here, and a 2% increase from FY19 to 20, I think, is not only modest, it's evidence of a plan that's been managed very, very well. So we're keeping those costs down.
Yeah, just to elaborate on that, probably about 4, 5, 6 years ago, the discussions on all of this started. So what ended up really happening was with representatives from each union came together with the city, and they formed what's called the PEC, which is like the Employee Benefits Committee. And what they decided was they came up with a plan that was very similar to the GIC, that pretty much mirrored it, but with a few changes that they wanted for themselves. So basically, some of the deductibles went up, some of the co-pays went up, and they managed it in such a way that was best for the employees of Brockton, so that they didn't have to have the same plan as other communities or as the state. But it was a plan that worked for the employees of Brockton. So that's why they saved, I think, between 3 and 4 million when they implemented the plan. And if they had gone strict GIC, it would have been a little over $1 million more that would have been saved. But when you say that saved, it would have been pushed it onto the employees, is basically how that worked. So, it went from a $25 visit to the emergency room to, I think, $100, $150 visit to the emergency room. So that's how the plan changed and was funded.
All right, anybody else?
Hi there. So I've looked at the city's budget and a couple of other ones from other communities in Massachusetts, and it depends, which you compare it to, but some of them are pretty day and night. Cambridge, for example, includes things like performance indicators for their different departments or goals that they want to achieve over the next fiscal year, so that it gives you, kind of when you look at the budget, you can then put that into context and hold people accountable to what they said they were going to deliver for how much money was given to them in the prior year. So I'm just wondering, I think at one of the city council meetings you did mention something about working to change the budget so it starts to comply with best practices. So I was wondering if you could tell us a little bit about that, and hopefully we can get to something that's a little bit more accessible.
That's a great question. I assure the rest of the folks here that was not a plant, but it does give me a great opportunity to talk about one of the developments that I'd like to see in the city's budget for next year, so that would be a year from now. There's an international organization called the GFOA, or the Government Finance Officers Association, and they have a program where they will rate and award budgets that meet a series of criteria in terms of the level of information they provide and the transparency that they provide. So in the previous community where I worked, and just a few miles from here in Hanover, despite the fact that Hanover was a pretty small town, we were able to get that budget awarded the Distinguished Budget Award from the GFOA, and that I've already stated publicly is clearly a goal of mine for the city of Brockton for next year. I can tell you it's a lot of work and will require a team effort. To give you a sense of some of the challenges that we have here, I'm glad you mentioned Cambridge, because Cambridge and Brockton are similarly situated in terms of population. We both hover right around $100,000. Excuse me, 100,000 people. I'm thinking money, which is a good thing. But when it comes to money, Cambridge's annual budget is around $625 million, where ours all in with enterprise funds is about $450. And so there's flexibility there, I think, to our budget director, Karen Praval, who's been a phenomenal asset to the city, actually came from the city of Cambridge, and she worked there. And so she's brought some of what she learned there here, but in discussions about the size and scope of the staff to put together a GFOA compliant budget, it's less of a heavy lift in Cambridge than it is here because of the flexibility in terms of staff. Despite that, I am committed and happy to say, just today, we're not even in the new fiscal year, but I sent an email to someone who helped actually compile that budget in Hanover to seek his advice to start talking already about fiscal year 2021 and how we can improve and make that a more transparent and engaging document.
As soon as you said the question, I said, oh, there's going to be a smile on his face. All right. Anybody else? Anybody? You guys want to ask each other questions? I mean, we got time. Oh, okay.
So kind of following along those lines, I'm wondering, I used to live in a community where the city would set aside a small pot of money to essentially allow local residents to vote on community improvement projects for the allocation of that money. So it could be a new sculpture, it could be a new, I don't know, accessible playset at a playground or something like that. And more widely, I guess you could kind of call that more participatory budgeting. We don't really see that here in Brockton. Everything's kind of, I mean, even this meeting is held after the fact. You know, things have already been agreed. So this is more of an information as opposed to us being able to kind of say, this is what we think where the money should go. So I'm just wondering, from your point of view, whether you see kind of more participatory budgeting coming into play in Brockton as well.
So I'll make a distinction between greater public involvement in the budget process and the first item you described, which was really consensus spending on public art or things like that. So to answer the latter first, I love that idea. That sort of discretionary spending requires the flexibility to be able to do so. And so here, I think the pressures and the requirements on spending to deliver the most basic services, you heard Aldo talk about the challenge with funding public education, have been, and I think will certainly continue to be the priority. Now, this is a personal, not a professional opinion I'm about to offer. However, I am a firm believer that the arts and culture and music are a critically important part of any vibrant community. So to the extent that I can, will certainly support efforts to set money aside for those types of purposes. I love the idea, and have not experienced it in my career, of the consensus spending, my term, and so I'd love to explore that in more detail with you. Like I said, I left cards. Shoot me an email, and we can get together and talk more about that. I think in terms of the process, there is and was a public hearing held by the council to discuss the budget, but I am certainly amenable as we progress toward next year's budget to expanding on that and having more meetings like this as the budget's being compiled to try to listen to the residents and taxpayers about what's important. If you remember at the beginning, I mentioned that the budget is the most important policy statement of a community. And so making that policy statement with the input of the people who are impacted by that spending is a really good idea. And so I'm happy to engage as we move forward in the coming months. Aldo, anything to add to that? I know you're a fan of the arts too.
Of course, not the singing part, but everything else. I think what we look for, at least in the school administration, they have PAC meetings and parent meetings, and they in turn talk to the principals, and the principals in turn make requests. Because every year when we do the budget, we send out in November for the following July 1st, what is your budget request? And principals have come in and requested, for example, the outside seating, the outside tables outside the schools. So requests like that have come through. I think at the high school they wanted to set up growing vegetables and plants in that area between all the buildings in the center of the building. So those requests come through, and when we do the budget, we look to see what we can fund. So there's never been a formal process where we sit down and say how to use it, but we look at the, I guess, the funnel approach where it comes through and different principals ask for different things, and we try and get them, you know, even if it's not the whole project, we try and get them things that they've asked for in their areas. I know that we're doing the playground, I think, at the Downey. They're going to redo that whole playground. That has been coming through requests. I know that the Kennedy School got one about 4 or 5 years ago. I know that the Hancock School got one. All the newer schools, the ones that are 15 years old, they all had playgrounds. So that's kind of how we filtered the request through in the past. But I like that idea too.
Yep. And, you know, little shout out to the counselors that are here. Any ideas for things you'd like to see in your community, absolutely, you know, reach out to, you know, your representatives. It doesn't have to wait till the next budget. You know, maybe the money's not there and it technically does have to wait till the next budget, but that is something that, you know, people can talk about and get the ball rolling on, you know, and see what we need. Same with, you know, the way the principals do it with the school department budget. They're a third.
There is, unless somebody else has.
Hi, I have a quick question. I came in late and I'm sorry, it's traffic. I work in Boston. I wanted to know who you guys are. And I'm new to the city of Brockton also. I've moved here about 3 years ago. So I don't know who is who. So would you please let me know who you are, both of you, and what role you play in the city?
First of all, welcome. I'm new to the city as well. My name is Troy Clarkson, and I am the Chief Financial Officer for the city. And my role is to oversee the finances of the city. My position was created by the legislature in 1990, and so I have responsibilities set forth in that legislation for oversight and engagement. For instance, contracts with a duration of more than 1 year must flow through my office for approval, and so I interact really with all departments in the city, but in particular oversee the financial operations, including the treasurer collector and the assessor and the auditor, and then a staff within my office that includes a couple of financial analysts and a budget director. So we're really the heartbeat of the finances of the city.
Hi, I'm Aldo Petronio. I'm the Chief Financial Officer of the school department. School department's almost half of the city budget. So there's this specific role where, as Troy said, he oversees the whole city. I oversee all the schools, which is 23 schools, a maintenance facility, a storage facility. Again, many contracts. We have our own little police force of 10 officers under the management of the Brockton Police, our own police force. Again, we have custodians, teachers, paraprofessionals. So all of the finances, all the payroll flow through my office. And once a week, I meet with Troy at his office. We have a weekly meeting about the schools and the overall city. So we're all on the same page.
Let me just expand on that for a minute. I'm glad Aldo brought that up because in my professional experience and indeed in my personal life, relationships are critically important. And so I've only been here for a few months, but we've already established a relationship where we meet as Aldo mentioned, meet every week, all members of the finance team. We get together and talk about real substantive things. And because Aldo grew up in the city government, he was the city auditor before he went over to the school department. You know, he has input on things that we're doing on the city side, and so that sort of collaboration is very valuable. And those are the kinds of meetings that you won't see on cable access, or you won't read about in the paper, but it's important that you know that they happen, so that you know that we are working very closely together on a regular basis. And it's not just because I bring donuts to the meetings, I think.
What is the status of the police department in terms of number of police officers or any special programs that they may be trying to get up and running. For instance, several years ago, many years ago, we used to have a community police officer set up in the city, and it was tremendous. It was the best. And it gave the police assigned to the various areas of the city a chance to stop, talk to the neighborhoods and all this good stuff. And I was wicked involved with all that kind of stuff because the police officers, there's morning and nighttime. So it was a good way for them to keep up with what was going on and for us to do the opposite. Just as, I don't know if anybody is aware, because this happened last night, and this would have been a good opportunity to have people like that around. I was right where the police station is, and then the post office, and then there's Commercial Street. Okay, did you hear about this? No. Well, I was on my way to pick up a girlfriend that needed a ride home from work, and on Commercial Street, because then it turns into Commercial Courtyard Street, or it ends up on Grove Street. Okay, so if you stay straight. Well, the first part, the Commercial Street, all the trash barrels on that street were all tipped over. Every house. So there was some shenanigans going on sometime last night about that. But when you call the police department, of course, everything is put on a priority basis. Okay, so trash in the street is going to be down here, and somebody getting assaulted is going to be up there somewhere. But that was a good program, and I don't know if there's any news about reinstating that, or having anything extra, or hiring more police to to kind of boost up it was a sight to behold.
I do want to mention a couple things. Former Councillor Paul Studensky was also the former police chief, and he was the one that sort of really got the ball rolling with community policing. And he was a big advocate for that on the council, and he still is. He's still involved in some capacity. The police department did add new members, they're in the academy right now. And for, public safety related things, I'm working with, the DA's office does something called the Safe Streets program, where they'll meet, once a month. They don't do the meetings in July and August, but, for the other months they do meet. They bring in, people from the DA's office, people from the U.S. Attorney's office, local police, the sheriff's office, the state police, the FBI, all kinds of law enforcement, the worst place possible to commit a crime. And we're working to bring them up to Ward 6 sometime in the fall, so they can give a presentation on the state of how everything is, and hear from residents about things like community policing and stuff going on in their neighborhoods. They want to branch out and go to different places, and this is going to be, them sort of testing that out. And I think it'll work pretty well. I think we'll have a pretty good crowd. But, for the budget end of it, and, the status of the police, I'll handle it. Do you have anything?
Yeah, I'll defer to Council Beauregard and then have to follow up.
Okay.
I remember this community policing, but just so you realize, because this goes back a while, it was a great time financially for this nation, and particularly for our city, because Bill Clinton was president and money was pouring in here like crazy, and there were all these grants, and that's what that was under. And there was one right at Save-A-Lot. I live right around the block from Save-A-Lot, and it was instrumental in deterring crime, and it's because they had they used the term census tract, and there was breakdown of where the highest crimes were and the lower, and just to implement all these programs in a lot of neighborhood associations. And one of them was called Brockton Neighbors United. Again, the money was flowing, and that was instrumental because they had pockets of programs within that to address those issues. So now people are spinning off their own, and we have a great person in the city that does a training, but they have one here actually in Ward 6, and it's called the Village People. No, it's really, it's called the Village Neighborhood Association, in all seriousness. But that is part of an initiative to get people to realize what's going on, have connecting and communication. But I know that Joanne had one more question, so I'll pass it on to her.
Oh, I think you guys wanted to.
Oh, you wanted to mention that? Okay, good.
When you know your neighbors, it makes things a lot easier, makes things a lot safer, makes it a nicer place to live. It really does.
Just to briefly follow up to provide some in-depth answer to the question. One of the things that I did when I first got here in preparation for the budget that was just voted this week by the council was to look back over previous years to try to understand some trends and where the money was going. And one of the things I was able to realize is that the public safety spending has been a real priority for the mayor and the city council. And over the last several years, there have been actually several police officers added to the department. And when I say officers, I mean positions. There's always vacancies, and the vacancies, as Councillor Lally mentioned, are being filled right now. There are, I think, 17 officers in some stage of going through the police academy to join the force. But in addition to filling those vacancies, the mayor has proposed and the council has supported adding new positions to the department over the last several years. And so the police department staffing, in terms of the number of positions approved, is at one of the highest levels now that it's been in a very long time. And also, just this week, the council approved a grant from the federal government, 2 grants, that's right, that include money specifically for community policing. So the program is still there. I would suggest that you reach out to both the mayor's office and to the police department, to the chief's office, to see exactly how those programs are being implemented, or certainly talk to your district councilor who has the keys to the kingdom and has access to all the information.
No pressure. All right, I'm walking over here already with authority because I know that Councilor Beauregard said that Joanne, you had another question. Anyone? Okay.
I just wanted to ask about, just kind of going back to the participatory budgeting idea. There are some enterprise funds in the city I know that run at a net loss, like the golf course and the water department. So obviously they're eating up city funds that should be self-generated within those funds themselves. I'm just wondering, for years and years, there's been talk about sorting out the situation with water in particular, so that it isn't a loss as an enterprise fund. I'm just wondering what the plans this fiscal year are to kind of start addressing those net loss funds. And also, I don't play golf, but I love the golf course just because it's beautiful and I think it's great for Brockton reputationally and things like that. But if it's running at a loss as well, it's not really sound financially either. So I'm just wondering kind of what your take on those are.
So, the city makes a subsidy to the general fund for the operation of the golf course and the recreation department. So it's sort of a hybrid, and that's the word that I used at the council hearing. So here in Brockton, the delivery of services for golf and recreation is a hybrid, and it's unconventional. And so in that specific instance, let me go back a minute. I cut my teeth in municipal budgeting as the finance manager for an enterprise fund. So that's an area where I'm comfortable. The town of Bourne operates a large landfill through an enterprise fund, and I was their finance manager back there many, many years ago. So I think that both the mayor and the city council have made public recreation a priority in the city. And so with that, fund that operation through approximately $1 million subsidy for golf and recreation. Because when I first looked at it, I said, wow, that seems strange to me. But it's actually the funding mechanism that's been used. I think as we move forward with next year's GFOA compliant budget, we'll make great efforts to make that more transparent in terms of how that money works. However, so I wouldn't say necessarily that enterprise fund operates at a deficit. It's an intentional subsidy from the general fund for recreation in the city. Water is a different story. And you're correct. And last year, the water enterprise, and for those that aren't familiar with enterprise funds, the city has 4 or 5 enterprise funds, and they essentially operate like a business. And so the water delivery in the city, in the water department, the expenses to deliver water to your homes is supposed to be funded wholly through the fees that are collected by the water users, both so by the ratepayers. And so it's in and of itself, it's a closed system, so to speak, financially, not the water system itself. And it's supposed to operate like a business. And so it's been the profits, and air quotes, that an enterprise fund generates are not called free cash. They're called retained earnings, but it's essentially the free cash of the enterprise fund. And why that's important is because you use those retained earnings then to invest in your capital infrastructure. And so if the business is making money, then you can reinvest in the business, and you, the people who use the public water supply, which I assume is all of you, are the beneficiaries. And so the funding is a little upside down in that water enterprise fund. And last year there was an issue where the funding didn't quite meet the requirements. So one of the things that the council, and to their credit, took the initiative to take this up at a discussion at one of their meetings and talked about the need to invest in the infrastructure. Some of the water mains in this city are decades beyond their useful life and really need to be replaced. And so I will be discussing with the council in the coming weeks and months strategies to address that. But to be just crystal clear and frank and open and honest with you about it, strategies means fees, right? I mean, there are the days of the 1980s or 90s when Uncle Sam was delivering large checks for cities and towns to expand their water mains are just over. And so we need to be smart about how we fund those things. Now, you can borrow within an enterprise fund and pay the principal and interest within the enterprise fund receipts, and I think that would be something that I would recommend to the mayor and to the council. But we need sufficient receipts to do that. We have on staff an extremely capable financial analyst. He's actually an actuary, and he's a Brockton resident, and Andrew Nocon. And so he and I have already been meeting with Lally, the DPW commissioner, to try to develop some strategies of how best to increase that funding in the water and sewer enterprise funds so that we can invest in the infrastructure. And again, with a very sincere goal of minimizing the impact on the ratepayers. Just as an example, without raising the rates, it's possible to adjust or raise the base fee that you pay so that it's not a graduated increase, but is a static amount, a baseline amount that you pay. That's one way to generate more funds for the enterprises. So in addition to water and sewer, and you mentioned golf, we also have a solid waste enterprise fund where your trash, the cost for your trash pickup are cycled through that, and a renewable energy enterprise fund, so for the solar farm that the city has here. That's pretty small. The income and outflows in that one are about $250,000-ish a year. But the others are substantial. I mean, the water and sewer enterprises are both north of $25 million in annual spending. So that's a lot of money, and so that's why it's really important that we develop long-term strategies. And that's important for me to mention that too, because what we're talking about is not how do we get through fiscal year 2021. We're talking about how do we invest tens of millions of dollars in the infrastructure of this city in the long run, and have an overall strategy of how we minimize the impact of those investments on the taxpayers. Did that answer your question?
I don't think it really needs to be said, but you know, in this ward especially, you've got some problems with your water sometimes. You know, problems being problems, or problems being just water pressure. You know, it is a lot of our roads. You know, the pipes were put in improperly. The Campanelli properties and things like that. They were just the pipes are too small underneath. And, you know, it is important to mention, Councillor Cruz mentioned it during the budget, when you repair the water mains under a road, that road gets repaved. Two birds, one stone. I also want to note that my second year on the council, you know, about almost 2 years ago, there was a water main break in Ward 2, and the pipe they pulled out was date stamped 1876. So, you know, good news, the city government at the time made one hell of a purchase. Bad news, there's pipes underneath the roads date stamped 1876. So it is something that at the very least can't be losing money, especially for, you know, for everything that we rely on it for. Anybody else? Mind if I? Go right ahead. All right. Constituent services, I got your back.
Hi, and I just have a question about the water mains in the Campanellis. Because I have a situation now where one of the pipes burst underneath a Campanelli, but the city of Brockton won't repair it. And they're saying that you have to get a contractor to come in and do it because they don't work on Campanellis. And I would like to know why they won't repair the water main break when it's their pipe.
They'll do the sewer pipes. They won't do water. Their answer for that is they're not insured. They used to do the water pipes under Campanelli's, and they would dig, you know, part of what they had to do would be to dig under the slab the house is built on, and then the slabs would collapse, and then they'd get sued. So instead, the city just said that they're not going to do that. They recommend contractors. There is an insurance thing that you can get. A company called HomeServe, $8 a month or so, and they insure specifically the pipes under the Campanellis, because you know if they do go out from under you, they are expensive.
Since this has already happened, you probably won't be able to go to HomeServe, right?
Right.
So the people that I'm talking about won't be able to go to HomeServe, so they're just gonna have to pay out of pocket to have that fixed.
They'll have to.
$3,500 for a young couple who really can't afford that.
It's well, homeowners.
They went up so far. They can only go to whatever the was in the front of your yard, like so many feet from your home, and then you were responsible for that. Like, assuming that's the same thing, they would go to
Yeah, so that the homeowner's insurance, it wouldn't hurt calling the DPW. I know they did reach out, but you know, getting some kind of answer.
They also called their homeowner's insurance, and the insurance said, well, your house wasn't flooded, so they won't cover it.
Yeah, that's. We can, yeah, we'll touch base afterward as well. You know, I'll catch you on the way out, and so I'm gonna hand it over to you, Councillor. I know you want to say something.
Thank you, Council. Appreciate it very much. And I want to commend Councilor Lally for having this information night here this evening. And I've been sitting here listening to some of the concerns that people have in regards to the whole budget process. And I know it's been mentioned that it's too bad that we can't talk about the budget before the budget becomes before the council. But unfortunately, the budget is a process that begins really without the council really being involved, because remember, any budget that's prepared in the city is a mayor's budget. Excuse me. Doesn't matter who the mayor is, he or she is. It's that particular person. It's their job to create and to put the budget together. Do we as councils have a say in it? Sure you do. It's all in how the councils want to work with the mayor's office as well. And I know Councilor Lally does. He meets with the mayor. He goes up, and if it isn't the mayor, it's with the chief of staff, as I do, and as other councils do too. I'm not saying that all do, but with that helps us know that we can get some things into the budget that are going to help our constituents. Now, he represents you here in Ward 6, and I came here tonight specifically because I did tell him the last time I didn't come, and I says, it's too far to drive, and I says, I'll make the ride this time. I'm down in Ward 3 in Campello. So, and his grandmother came from Campello so many years ago, so you know the distance, Ellen, yeah, you know how it goes, right? But in any case, I wanted to come because I think it's important for councilors to come around to all of the ward meetings and listen to the conversation that you people are having here this evening as well. It's also great to see, our new Chief Financial Officer here, Mr. Clarkson, and I was a part of the interview process when it was all put together to the fact that Mr. Condon was leaving, and Mr. Clarkson came out to be a top candidate, and I've known him over the years, being involved in other municipalities and working on municipal budgets. Excuse me. Mr. Petronio, I had the great pleasure of knowing for a long time, and as he worked as our city auditor for a long time, and I as a councilor, I'm the old guy on the council, so the dean with some history. But it is important, and I always say it is important, that we work with our constituents and that we try to do what we can and our very best to make sure that things get done and accomplished. Do they get accomplished as fast as we want them to? No, and I think Councilor Lally would agree with me, and even Councilor Beauregard would agree. Some of those things just don't happen as fast as we want them to. But we are, in the process right now with the new CFO, agreeable to him, as he's mentioned to us at the budget meetings last week, that he wants to sit down with the council a little bit more often. When we have our finance meeting, that's where we do our work. But that's where we need to be doing work about finance. That's where we need to want to talk with him and even invite our chief financial officer from the school department, because it's the largest department in the city, but to come over and we all work together on what our thoughts and theories are for that next budget. You sooner go into a brand new budget that's going to be in 2 weeks, and you're already thinking about, okay, what do we do for FY 2021? Because it's here before you know it. And everything does happen as fast as, it really does. It's really fast. So in any case, I just wanted to, just mention my little bit of points of what I've known about budgets. I've been involved in for so many years, that it's not an easy task. And the one thing that we don't like to do is to try to, take something away from where we think can be positive. Same with any department, or school department, or any department within the city. Budget meeting the other night went for about an hour. Yes, there were some cuts made to that budget, but keep in mind, the cuts are made to the budget. All it is comes off the bottom line. The mayor can still reappropriate for what was taken out. He has every right to, whether we approve the appropriation or not, but he has every right to come back with it. I also heard a question in regards to the community policing, and as Councilor Beauregard mentioned, those were the great years when President Clinton had money to give to us, and they actually came to the state of Massachusetts and said, this is what Massachusetts is going to get. And every year we were able to add and add, because we were still able to come in the following years when that money went away, we would have that money in place. The sad feature we have right now, and yes, we have new police officers coming on, and both councils know this, but for the 17 that come on, 19 could leave us. For the 18 more that come on, 12 could leave us. We never get to where we want with the number, and we never really are able to get the people that we want out on the street, and we know that's a big concern. It's a very big concern that people have right now from some things that have happened in the past couple of years and couple of summer seasons that we're watching very closely. And I know Councillor Lally will be, as well as Councillor Beauregard, myself as well in Ward 3 area, and even the other councils too, is the concern of all these home type of parties and everything that happen around the 4th of July. We have great concerns with. So I don't want you to think we don't. We do. And we know we make our contacts with the police department. We want to make sure that we have as many people out when we get into close to that holiday. It's very difficult, and everyone's been wrapped up over the spring with the rain, and now people are coming out. But in any case, I don't want to keep dragging on, but I do want to thank Councilor Lally for, having this meeting here this evening, because I think it's important and makes you people understand, not just because you're Ward 6 people, but we're all people of the city of Brockton. We're all residents, and we're one big city trying to work together in your best interest, not ours. It's all about you. I appreciate it. Thank you, Councilor.
Yeah, I always say, oh, come up to Ward 6. Come to Ward 6. It's a whole different city, Montello, Campbell. Thank you, Councillor.
Thank you for having this meeting this evening. Just want to pass on some information. School's out. And you could tell already, what I couldn't get over was the traffic that dissipated that you usually see with the school buses and everything else. So anyway, enjoy it while you can. But we want to see that the kids are really, doing all kinds of things this summer. There's tons of free things that the kids can do, and there's also all kinds of deals and bargains. I have plenty of these. They, for, school-age kids, summer resource guide, and this put out every year by Parent Information, and want to pass that on. Kick off the summer with summer solstice, and also, you can go one side of town, the other, do stuff for free. This starts at 4 o'clock right next to the Plouffe Academy. Different activities for the kids, a lot of information on what's going on, a lot of programs at the library. The kids have already started kicking off their summer reading. I was there today. I saw them taking out their books already. Pretty impressive. They just got out a couple hours before. Meanwhile, Field Park Association is doing their free movie. Remember, it gets dark later, so the movie starts later. That means the kids are up later. But anyway, and what is it? How to Tame Your Dragon, I think? Yes. And there's free popcorn and all that. So that's at, DW Field and the gazebo. But on a more serious note, we're trying for the transparency as much as possible. And I will say sometimes people misinterpret some kind of statements, and that's not the goal. Expressions and terms sometimes get a little confusing. But there's various committees, subcommittees, that are part of the City Council. You can attend every one of these meetings, okay? You are not excluded from any of them. One of them is called the Accounts Committee, and you get fat packs like this, and you go through all the spending for 1 month, and you get the details on what the money is spent on. So any of you can come. You can ask questions if you want. You want to know where your money's going. We're not trying to hide it from you. I will say sometimes it gets a little interesting because, again, a definition or interpretation goes a long way. And like I said, we want to emphasize that. We also want to emphasize that, call with the fireworks. Call and, say, this is what you're hearing. Call with the parties and whatever. And they emphasized this weekend, I had quite the episode on the Whitman-Brockton line, and had the Whitman police come, but the Whitman police didn't have any authorization. So, but what I want to emphasize about this is your driveway's blocked, you call the police, and you emphasize that, because you need to get out of your driveway, okay? People are going up and down the street, the fire department, fire trucks can't get down. Say this. They will come out. What people don't realize, and this is a situation for us, is we have the longest part of the stretch of Route 24, and Brockton police go out to Route 24. And there are a lot of accidents, unfortunately, in that area. So sometimes that is what one of the primary tie-ups is, issues of that nature, which is really unfortunate. And so that holds us up a little bit. But I want to emphasize that and call. You don't have to give your name. A lot of people get concerned about that. You don't have to worry about the retaliation. So a lot of us show up when there's parties and problems and speak to it. And also, last but not least, we can still do the begging thing, as I call it, and call our state reps and our state senator, 617-722-2000, and they will switch you to whomever you want, because they are reviewing the budget. We're lucky. They're real allies for the schools, and they're trying for whatever they can get. But they want the phone calls, not the emails, because they can't get a chance to look at all the emails, but the phone calls they record, and that helps them when they're, on the floor fighting for the funding. So anyway, and again, I'm Ann Borg. I'm the Ward 5 City Councilor, so I'm the other side of East Ashland Street. Okay.
Thank you. Yeah, no, it's definitely call. Even if you're not sure how long it'll take, definitely call. Call as soon as it starts happening. If you think it'll take a while, they do have a lot of calls to reach. I did take down the information for the movie at DW Field Park. How to Train Your Dragon: The Hidden World, the 21st at 7:30 p.m. At the gazebo in DW Field Park. And yeah, the summer school, not summer school. Nobody wants to go to summer school. The resource guide is a fantastic resource. There were kids outside while this meeting was going on. One kid started doing pull-ups on the swing there. I didn't see how many he did, but I can confidently say it was more than I can do. But there's a whole lot of good resources. We're closing in on 8 p.m. I have the space till 8. Any questions? Final round. Anybody?
Is there a curfew? Is there a
No.
regulated curfew?
The noise ordinance applies 24/7. Some people work nights. It's not fair to them if the noise ordinance only applied in the evening. So basically what happens is you call, they go out, they use their judgment, and they ask them to turn it down. They'll give them 2-3 strikes, and then they have to start citing people.
Somewhere I can find a written copy of the noise ordinance. I was just looking for that recently.
I don't know the actual number, but there is an ordinance. When I came on the city council some years back, I had a problem in Ward 3,
and the problem I had in Ward 3 was when the stadium was new, and they decided they were going to have a concert at the stadium. It was 2004. Nobody told me that they were going to do that. It was under the units administration, and all of a sudden the stadium was just jammed. And the music was bellowing so bad that people couldn't even enjoy their 4th of July because of the way they had set the stage to the level of the second floor of the stadium, which was not the right thing to do. Music just went over everyone's neighborhood naturally. So I had taken a look at the noise ordinance, which didn't have much to say, and I had rewritten it to a point which would bring it to the fact that we'd be using X amount of decimals, and you'd have a decimal amount, listener, whatever. The last couple of years, about 2 years ago, we had started to do that, myself and Councillor Monahan, to rewrite that, and all of a sudden it went to the back burner, and it shouldn't have. I have the original copy, and I believe what I'm going to do in the next few weeks is talk to our legal counsel, and I'm going to try to get that back on the table again, coming under me and even Councillor Monahan, and any other council naturally, and at the same time include some of these things that the neighbors are bringing to our attention, which would be that type of a situation. Could there ever be some type of a curfew? I think there can be to a stoppage of, what time they stop, and I think we did that somewhat in a letter. Now when people want to have a neighborhood party, they have to go to the police station, you have to get a form, you have to fill it out. And there was a party that was just in my neighborhood just the other night, Sunday night, and I came home at 9:30 and I said, where's the noise coming from? I live on West Chestnut Street, and I couldn't fathom it, right around my neighborhood, so I got back in the car and took a ride, and then I came up with, it was just a street or two over. And I have to tell you, it was in control, but the noise and the cars and the tent was bigger than this room alone, and I'm like, how do we But all of a sudden, 10 o'clock came, and I think that's the time they're supposed to stop. The music went away. I have to say, because I was waiting to how, am I going to call? Of course I was going to call, but all of a sudden, the noise like dissipated, so it stopped, and even a couple neighbors of mine called me. But that's what needs to be still built into the ordinance. We need to give that to the police department, so there's some beef to it, and that's what we need to be doing, as well as other things that transpire. I mean, a woman called me the other day and said, if you're gonna write an ordinance, then what about the cars, the low riders that go by my house at 9 o'clock at night, and all you hear is this music bellowing and the picture window cracks? Got a great point. We gotta find a way to stop it. So I'm gonna look at doing something to go one step higher. Okay.
I noticed you mentioned decibels, and when I was looking up to find an ordinance, it kept saying decibels, but I don't know how to,
Right, and
how
it,
to equate that to anything. I do know that my neighbor was mowing his lawn at 6:30 in the morning.
right.
And how do I give something to him to say, you can't mow your lawn at 6:30 in the morning?
Right. There is something in there that does talk about that, because technically nothing is supposed to begin in the city before like 6 o'clock, even any type of construction work or anything. If anyone's building a house next door to you, they're not supposed to start, you know what I mean? You have to be careful of that as well, but we have to take a look at that, and it's something that the whole council has to take a look at. We'll go to ordinance committee, but we all have to have a say on that, so we're gonna be working on that. I won't say it's done for this summer, but we're gonna be working on something like that. Okay, thanks, Councilor.
Thank you. If I were mowing my lawn at 6:30 in the morning, first of all, ask if I'm okay, but second of all, brownies would solve that. No, that could be something as easy as saying, hey, I'd like to get a little bit more time in, just a bit. Yeah. Got anybody else? Bueller? No? Okay, anything in closing either of you want to say?
I just want to thank Councillor Lally for sponsoring this. This is, I think, a great venue to get into some of the details that you just don't have the opportunity to do at the larger meetings. And so please grab my card, stay in touch. Happy to engage and really appreciate the feedback.
Thank you.
All right, I'm aiming to have 2 more meetings this year, spaced out the rest of the year. Nothing else in the summer, though. You're off. You're free. Nothing's assigned, no homework, no projects. But thank you all for coming. I appreciate it. Thank you to Troy. Thank you to Aldo.